My wife texted from Maui. Just married your business partner. You're pathetic. I replied, cool. Then I opened my laptop. She thought that one word meant I was finished. She had no idea it was the last mistake she would ever make. My name is Raymond Colby. I'm 54 years old, and I built everything I have with my own two hands. No inheritance, no shortcuts, no safety net. 22 years ago, I started a pharmaceutical distribution company out of a rented office the size of a closet in Lower Manhattan. Today, that company moves product through 14 states and employs over 300 people. I tell you this not to brag, but because you need to understand what was at stake. And you need to understand that a man who builds something like that from nothing doesn't do it by being careless. But I was careless about one thing. I let the wrong person stand too close to the fire. Looking back, I can trace exactly where things went sideways. Not the night she sent the text. That was just the moment the curtain finally dropped. The real beginning was the day I introduced Portia to Reed Calloway at a company dinner 3 years ago. She was my wife. He was my new business partner, a man I had personally vouched for, personally mentored, personally helped get a foothold in an industry he would have never entered without my name behind him. I shook his hand that evening and felt good about it. Thought I was building something lasting. Turns out I was handing a fox the keys to the henhouse and pointing him straight at the door. I should have seen the signs earlier. The locked phone screen that appeared out of nowhere. The client dinners that ran past midnight. The way she stopped asking about my day. Not slowly, but like a switch had been flipped. I noticed. I always noticed. But I told myself I was being paranoid, that a man who works as hard as I do isn't entitled to demand constant warmth at home. I was wrong to talk myself out of it. Dead wrong. The text came on a Thursday night. I was in my home office reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed on the desk. I picked it up without thinking. It was from Portia. Just marry my business partner in Maui. You're pathetic, by the way. There was a photo attached. Portia in a cream cocktail dress, standing barefoot on some hotel terrace with a view of the Pacific behind her. Reed Calloway in a linen suit, arm around her waist, looking like a man who had just won something. Lay garlands around both their necks. Pink and orange sky. I stared at it for a long moment. Not because I was shocked. Something in my gut had been bracing for a blow for months. I was studying the image the way you study a contract before you sign it. Looking for the details. Memorizing them. I set the phone face down on the desk. Then I picked up my cold coffee, took a slow sip, and turned back to the quarterly report. Read 3 more lines. Then I picked up the phone again and typed my reply. Cool. Sent it. Set the phone down again. Then I opened my laptop. I want to be clear about what happened in the next 4 hours, because people always assume a man in my position would be throwing furniture or reaching for a bottle. I did neither. What I did was work. The kind of quiet, methodical work that I had honestly been preparing for longer than I care to admit. I started with the financials. Our joint brokerage account, frozen. Her personal investment portfolio linked to our family office, flagged and suspended under the spousal asset protection clause. The shared American Express Centurion card, deactivated. Her access to the company expense account, revoked. I moved through each item the way I move through a due diligence checklist. No hesitation. No second-guessing. By midnight, I had changed the biometric locks on the penthouse. Her facial scan, fingerprint profile, and key fob access, all purged from the system. I watched the confirmation screen for a moment, then moved on. By 1 in the morning, I called my attorney, Douglas Farr, and left him a message marked urgent. Then I opened a folder on my encrypted drive that I had labeled 6 months ago. I had named it simply, Contingency. It wasn't empty. I had started building that folder the week I found a hotel receipt in the pocket of her blazer. The one she wore to a conference in Boston that her assistant later let slip had been canceled. One receipt. That was all it took to flip a switch in my brain. After that, I stopped reacting and started recording. Cloud account mirrored. Location data cross-referenced. Expense logs audited. 8 months of quiet, patient documentation. By 2 in the morning, every joint financial structure we had built together had been secured or dismantled. The penthouse was mine alone. Her cards were hollow. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city. Manhattan at 2 a.m. still hums, distant sirens, a garbage truck somewhere below, the red blink of a tower light across the river. I pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass and thought about Reed Calloway. About the day, I vouched for him. About the handshake. Then I went to bed. Not because I was at peace, but because I had work to do in the morning, and a man who doesn't sleep is a man who makes mistakes. I couldn't afford mistakes. Not now. I was up at 5:30 the next morning. Not because I set an alarm. I haven't needed one in 20 years. My body knows when work is waiting. I showered, dressed in a charcoal suit, and made a double espresso in the kitchen. The penthouse was quiet in the way only expensive real estate can be quiet. Thick walls, triple pane glass, the whole city muffled to a low hum 40 floors below. I stood at the kitchen island and pulled up the security app on my tablet. Portia had attempted entry twice overnight. 2 rejected scans. I noted the timestamps, 1:47 a.m. and 2:23 a.m., and added them to the contingency folder. Then I opened the forensic audit report my financial advisor, Tom Brearley, had prepared 3 weeks earlier at my request. I had asked him quietly, told him only that I was doing a routine asset review. He had done his job well. What he found was not routine. Portia had retained a private notary 8 weeks ago. She had attempted to amend our joint estate documents, specifically to redirect a block of shared real estate holdings into a personal trust registered under her maiden name, Aldine. The amendment had not been completed. It had stalled at the filing stage, likely because she needed my signature and had been waiting for the right moment to present it to me under some pretense. She never got that moment. I had moved faster. I set the report down and looked out the window. The city was just starting to lighten at the edges, that particular gray-blue of early Manhattan mornings that I have always found clarifying rather than gloomy. 3 weeks ago, I had also received a letter forwarded from our shared P.O. box. A box Portia had apparently forgotten. I still checked. The envelope was from a mortgage pre-qualification office in Sedona, Arizona. Inside was a preliminary approval letter for a property purchase. The borrower listed was Portia Aldine. The co-applicant was Reed Calloway. The property address was a 4-bedroom home in a gated community outside Sedona. They had been planning this for longer than I had realized. Not an impulse. A blueprint. I photographed both documents, added them to the folder, and sent copies to Douglas Farr's office with a single line. Full review requested. Urgent. By 7 a.m. my phone buzzed. It was Douglas. "Ray," he said, skipping any greeting. "I went through what you sent last night and this morning. How long have you been sitting on all this?" 8 months. I replied evenly. A pause. The estate amendment attempt alone gives us significant leverage. Combined with the Sedona filing, this is coordinated asset diversion. Premeditated. He let that land for a moment. The prenup infidelity clause is airtight. Signed, notarized, witnessed by 2 independent attorneys. Victor Aldine himself reviewed it before the wedding. I allowed a short pause of my own. Her father. He always did believe in doing things correctly. Douglas made a low sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Okay, I'll have a full motion drafted by end of day. Do not let her into the building. She's already been locked out," I noted. After the call, I poured a second espresso and sat at my desk. I opened the secondary section of the contingency folder, the one I thought of privately as the Reed Calloway file. What I had assembled there went beyond personal betrayal. It touched on business. 18 months ago, I had personally guaranteed a credit line for Reed's expansion into the mid-Atlantic pharmaceutical market. $800,000. My name on the paper, my reputation behind it. I had done it because I believed in the partnership. What I had discovered 4 months later, through a contact at a competing firm who mentioned it offhand over dinner, was that Reed had simultaneously been carrying personal debt north of $1 million. 2 civil judgments from prior business disputes, a tax lien from the IRS that he had been quietly negotiating. He had come to me already compromised and said nothing. He had used my guarantee as a lifeline while pursuing my wife and planning an exit strategy with her. I had known all of this for 4 months. I had said nothing. I had simply documented it and waited. I pulled up the geolocation data from Portia's cloud account. 19 overlapping location records showing her and Reed in the same buildings, same hotels, same neighborhoods on dates when she had told me she was in client meetings or out of town for work. 19 times in 14 months. I had printed the map. It fit on a single page. I folded it once and slid it into the folder behind the mortgage letter. Then I walked to the window with my coffee and looked down at the street. Morning traffic was building. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Life, entirely indifferent to everything happening on the 40th floor. My phone buzzed again. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Colby, my name is Nikki Calloway, Reed's wife. I think we need to talk. I read it twice. Then I type back, yes, we do. I set the phone on the windowsill and finish my coffee. Whatever Portia and Reed had imagined this looked like from their side. A clean escape, a fresh start, a man left standing in the rubble. They had badly miscalculated. The rubble was theirs. I had spent 8 months making sure of it. The knock came at 8:14 in the morning. Not the tentative kind. 3 hard raps, the kind designed to announce authority before the door even opens. I was still at my desk. I set down my pen, straightened my jacket, and walked to the front door without hurrying. 2 officers stood in the hallway, both in uniform, both with that particular expression cops where when they've been told a story they half believe and have decided to come in swinging anyway. The one on the left was broader, mid-40s, with a jaw that looked like it had been used to make a point once or twice. The one on the right was younger, sharper-eyed, already scanning the apartment behind me before I said a word. Mr. Colby, the broader one said. That's right. NYPD. We have a complaint filed against you. He didn't show the report, just held the posture. Your wife, Portia Colby, has alleged financial harassment, unlawful asset seizure, and willful lockout from the marital residence. I looked at him for a moment. Then I stepped back and gestured them in. They entered. The younger officer's eyes swept the living room. The clean lines, the stacked files on the coffee table, the white legal folder sitting squarely in the center like I had placed it there for exactly this occasion. Which I had. Gentlemen, I said, would you like coffee? The broader officer ignored that. Mr. Colby, your wife is alleging that you froze her accounts and locked her out of this property without legal authorization. Those are serious. She's still legally my wife. I cut in, keeping my voice level. She traveled to Maui and entered into a marriage ceremony with another man while our union remained legally intact and our joint assets remained jointly held. I secured those assets accordingly. I picked up the white folder and held it out. Everything is documented, time-stamped, backed by our prenuptial agreement, which includes a full infidelity clause reviewed and signed by 2 independent attorneys. The broader officer took the folder, didn't open it immediately, just held it. She has a right to re-enter the marital home, the younger one said, almost too quickly, like a line he'd rehearsed. I turned to look at him. Does she? Under what statute, specifically, when the property deed is held solely in my name and has been since purchased? I'll let that settle. I'd like to hear the legal basis before we continue. The younger officer's jaw tightened. He glanced at his partner. Something about that glance bothered me. It was too fast, too coordinated. These 2 had been briefed on more than just a domestic complaint. Someone had told them what to push on. The broader officer opened the folder. I watched his eyes move across the first page. The prenup summary, the asset log, the timestamp security records from the night before. This is more documentation than most civil attorneys produce in a week, he said quietly. I tend to prepare, I replied. He flipped to the 3rd page, the forensic audit summary showing Portia's attempted estate amendment. His expression didn't change, but his shoulders dropped a fraction. The younger officer leaned over to look, and for the first time since they'd arrived, neither of them spoke. I let the silence run. Finally, the broader officer closed the folder and held it back out to me. Mr. Colby, this complaint was filed from Hawaii jurisdiction. That creates immediate enforcement issues on our end. He cleared his throat. We're going to need to refer this to the civil division. I expected as much, I said, taking the folder. My attorney is Douglas Farr. His contact information is on the last page. He'll be available from 9 o'clock. They left 3 minutes later. I stood at the closed door for a moment, listening to the elevator arrive and depart. Then I walked back to my desk and made note. Those 2 had been pointed at me. The younger one's rehearsed line, the speed of their arrival. Someone had made calls before I was even awake. Portia, or Reed, or both. They had expected to rattle me enough to back down and open the building. They had come to the wrong door. I picked up my phone and called Roy at the front desk. Roy, I said when he answered. If anyone attempts entry using Ms. Colby's credentials today, or comes to the desk on her behalf, I need to know immediately. Anyone. Roy's voice was steady and unhurried, the way it always was. He had done 2 tours in Vietnam and spent 30 years after that standing between the lobby and the upper floors of this building. There was not much that moved him. "Understood, Mr. Colby," he said. "Nobody gets through that I don't clear with you first." I thanked him and ended the call. Then I went to the kitchen, made a fresh espresso, and carried it to the window. The city was fully awake now. Cabs, pedestrians, the whole indifferent machinery of it. The morning had gone exactly as I expected, and the day was just getting started. I want to tell you how the contingency folder began. Not because it matters to the legal outcome. It doesn't. But because I think it says something true about the difference between a man who survives betrayal and a man who gets buried by it. It started with a blazer pocket. Portia had worn a slate gray blazer to what she called a brand strategy summit in Boston. A 2-day event, she said, that she absolutely had to attend in person. She came home Sunday evening, kissed me on the cheek, went upstairs. I hung her blazer in the hall closet, because I am the kind of man who hangs things up rather than letting them pile on chairs. In the inner pocket, I found a folded receipt from the Langham Hotel in Boston. 1 room, Friday and Saturday night. No conference rate. Full rack rate. The kind of rate a hotel charges when a room is booked without any event affiliation. I stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then I folded the receipt exactly as I'd found it, put it back in the pocket, and hung the blazer up. I did not confront her. Confronting someone with a single receipt is a fight, not a reckoning. What I wanted was a reckoning. So I started building. Within the week, I had quietly mirrored her cloud account through a shared device she had forgotten was still linked to the household network. I didn't look for anything dramatic at first, just patterns. Calendar entries. Contacts she called more than once. Her rideshare history, which she had never thought to keep private. Over the following weeks, the pattern clarified. Reed Calloway's name appeared on dates that aligned with the Boston trip, and then again and again. A restaurant receipt on a Tuesday, she had told me she was working late. A car service pickup from an address in Tribeca that was not her office. I cross-referenced her rideshare data against her stated schedule for 14 months. 19 confirmed overlaps with Reed's location data. I printed the map. It fit on 1 page. I did not say a word. 3 months and I retained a forensic financial analyst, discreetly, through a contact entirely separate from my business network. He found the attempted estate amendment within 6 weeks. Portia had retained a private notary and initiated paperwork to move a block of our jointly held real estate assets into a personal trust under her maiden name, Aldine. She needed my signature on one final instrument. She had been building up to asking for it, presumably waiting for a moment when I seemed relaxed and unsuspecting. That moment never came. 2 months after that, the Sedona mortgage letter arrived at our shared P.O. box. Reed Calloway listed as co-applicant. A 4-bedroom property. Pre-approved. I photographed it, added it to the folder, said nothing. And then my investigator came back with a Reed Calloway background report. The man I had personally guaranteed $800,000 for. The man whose name was now on a mortgage application with my wife was carrying over $1 million in personal debt. 2 civil judgments from prior partnerships gone bad. An IRS tax lien he had been negotiating quietly for 2 years. He had come to me already compromised, already underwater, and used my guarantee as a rope to climb out while planning an entirely different future with Portia. I remember sitting with that report at my desk on a Tuesday morning, reading it twice, then placing it in the folder and going to 10 o'clock meeting. I didn't skip the meeting. I ran it. Because that is what you do when you're building something worth protecting. You keep working. You keep thinking. And you make sure that when the moment finally comes, everything is already in place. By the time Portia sent that text from Maui, I had 31 documents in the contingency folder. The text from Maui became document 32. Her 2 failed entry attempts that first night became 33 and 34. I had started as a man being deceived. I had finished as a man with a complete record of every move they had made. The difference between those 2 things is not talent. It is patience. Connor called at 9:47 that morning. I saw his name on the screen and picked up before the second ring. Dad. His voice was tight. Not panicked. Connor doesn't panic. He gets precise when things go wrong. Same way I do. Tell me what's happening. I saw a photo on Instagram an hour ago. Mom in a wedding dress in Maui. Someone tagged her. I sat back in my chair. What I'm about to tell you isn't easy to hear. but I need you to hear all of it before you respond. I spent 8 minutes walking him through the key facts. The text, my response, the financial lockdown, the attorneys, the documents. I did not editorialize. I gave him the information the way I would brief a colleague, clean, sequential, complete. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of shock, more like a man running calculations. Reed Calloway, he said finally. The name came out flat and deliberate. Yes, I had dinner with that man 4 times. You brought him to our table. A pause. How long have you known? 8 months. I wanted to be certain before I moved. Another silence. Then, and I heard something shift in his voice, something that sounded less like a 24-year-old and more like someone much older. She called me last week. Said she wanted to have lunch when she got back from her trip. I thought it was just, I don't know. Mom being mom. He exhaled. She was going to tell me afterward, wasn't she? Once it was done, present it as a fait accompli. That would be consistent with the pattern, I said. Dad. His tone was direct now, the way it gets when he's made a decision. I'm a financial analyst. I know how asset structures work. What do you need from me? I told him to stay available, stay quiet, and let Douglas Farr handle the legal mechanics. I also told him something I had been waiting to say for months. The man who married your mother built nothing on his own. Everything Reed Calloway has, he built on borrowed credibility and borrowed money. Most of it borrowed from me. That's going to matter in court. Connor absorbed that. He used your guarantee to float himself while he stopped. His jaw must have tightened because his voice went quieter. Okay, I'll stay close. You call me if you need anything. We ended the call. I set the phone on the desk and looked at the wall for a moment. 24 years old and already carrying himself like a man who has decided exactly who he intends to be. I had done at least one thing right. That afternoon, Portia attempted entry to the building for the 4th time. Roy called me at 2:15. She's at the desk, Mr. Colby, he said, unhurried. Says she needs to collect personal belongings. Has a gentleman with her. Not Mr. Calloway. Someone I don't recognize. Could be an attorney. Don't let either of them pass the lobby, I said. Tell her that access for personal belongings must be arranged through my attorney. You have Douglas Farr's card. Already told her that, sir. She's not pleased about it. I could imagine. Hold the line, Roy. Always do, he replied. 20 minutes later, she was gone. Roy texted me a single word. Clear. I typed back. Thank you. That evening I received a text for Victor Aldine, Portia's father. 68 years old, former federal prosecutor, a man who had spent 30 years arguing cases in front of juries and never once lost his composure in public. His message was 4 lines. Raymond, I heard from Douglas's office this afternoon. I want you to know, I am aware of what my daughter has done. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I have something that may be relevant to your case. I'd like to meet. I read it 3 times. Then I type back, tomorrow morning. My office. 9 o'clock. I set the phone down and looked out at the city. Victor Aldine was not a man who reached out without a reason. Whatever he was bringing to that meeting, it would be significant. He had reviewed our prenuptial agreement before the wedding. He had done it because he believed in doing things right, even when it applied to his own daughter. I had respected him for that then. I respected him more now. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon, the first drink I had allowed myself since the text from Maui, and stood at the window. The city moved below, indifferent as always. Reed Calloway was somewhere in it, probably believing the hardest part was behind him. Portia was somewhere with her blocked cards and her rejected entry attempts, probably telling herself she still had options. They were both wrong. The hardest part for them was just beginning. The Manhattan Healthcare Innovation Gala was held on a Thursday evening at a private club in Midtown that smelled of old money and fresh flowers. Portia and I had co-sponsored the event for 4 consecutive years. Her name was on the donor wall beside mine in embossed gold lettering. She had always loved that wall. I arrived alone, in the charcoal tuxedo she had once told me made me look like I owned the room. I wore it deliberately. The evening began with the usual choreography, cocktails, introductions, the careful navigation of a room full of people who were all simultaneously networking and pretending not to. I moved through it easily. This was my element, had been for 20 years. I shook hands, exchanged brief words, kept my expression pleasant and my posture straight. The whispers started within the first 20 minutes. I caught fragments, Portia, Maui, someone she worked with. I did not slow my stride. or change my expression. Let them talk. In rooms like this, information is currency, and I had already spent mine strategically. Midway through the evening, during dinner, I was approached by a journalist I recognized, a financial reporter from a business publication who had covered our company twice in the past. He came to my table with a recorder already in his hand, which told me this was not a casual conversation. "Mr. Colby," he said, pulling out the chair across from me without waiting for an invitation. "I was hoping to get a comment on the reports circulating about your wife and the Maui ceremony." I looked at him for a moment. Then I set down my fork, folded my hands on the table, and said in a voice that carried just enough to reach the two tables nearest us. "My wife had a big night in Maui. So did I." I picked my fork back up. "That's all I have for you." He sat there for a second, uncertain whether he had a quote or a dismissal. Then he stood, nodded once, and left. The table nearest me went quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then conversation resumed, a little louder than before. By morning, that exchange would have traveled through every relevant network in the city. I had counted on it. After dinner, the director of donor relations approached me with a clipboard and a carefully neutral expression. "Mr. Colby," she said, "for the donor wall update, will we be listing both names again this year?" I took the pen she offered, drew a clean line through Portia's name on the form, and handed it back. "Full listing under Colby this year," I said. "Single plaque." She took the form without comment, though her eyes registered the moment. I walked away before she could find anything to say. At 10:15, I stepped outside to the terrace for air. The city spread out below in its usual uninterested brilliance. My phone buzzed. A message from Douglas Farr. "Nevada reviewed the complaint. Jurisdiction declined. She's got nothing from that filing. More tomorrow." I read it once, pocketed the phone, and looked out at the skyline. While I was raising my glass at that table, Portia was somewhere making calls that weren't landing. Reed Calloway's financial situation was about to become public record through the court filings Douglas was preparing. Their Sedona blueprint was evidence in a case she had no idea was already fully assembled. She had married a man who was $1 million underwater and called me pathetic. That word had not bothered me then. It did not bother me now. What Portia had never understood, what people like her rarely do, is that the most dangerous man in any room is not the loudest one. It's the one who came prepared. I finished my drink, went back inside, and spent the next 40 minutes being the most composed person at the gala, which, as it turned out, was exactly what I needed to be. She arrived at my office at 10 o'clock sharp, which told me she was not the kind of woman who let grief make her imprecise. Nikki Calloway was 36 years old, dark-haired, composed in the brittle way of someone holding themselves together through sheer will. She wore a gray wool coat and carried a canvas tote bag over one shoulder. No designer label, no performance. Just a woman who had driven 4 hours from Charlotte, North Carolina, where she had apparently been living alone with 2 children under 8 for the past several months, because she had nowhere else to take what she was carrying. Roy called up from the lobby at 9:58. "Mrs. Calloway is here, Mr. Colby." "Send her up," I said. She stepped into my office, shook my hand with a firm grip, and sat down across from me without waiting to be invited. I respected that. "I'll be direct," she said, setting the tote bag on the chair beside her. "Reed told me 8 months ago that he was taking a consulting contract in New York. Long term. He said the kids and I should stay in Charlotte until he got settled. I believed him." Her jaw tightened. "He stopped paying the mortgage 3 months ago. I found out from the bank." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. She nodded once, acknowledging it without dwelling on it. Then she reached into the tote bag and produced a small flash drive. She set it on the desk between us. I went through his home office after the bank called me. He had a laptop he thought he'd locked. He used our older daughter's birthday as the password. A brief, humorless exhale. Inside was a shared folder. 14 months of correspondence between him and Portia. Planning documents. Financial projections. Timelines. She pushed the drive an inch closer to me. They weren't running away together on impulse. This was a coordinated exit strategy. 18 months of planning. They had a target date. I looked at the drive for a moment. Then I picked it up. "There's more," Nikki added. "One of the documents is a budget projection for the Sedona property. Reed's contribution was supposed to come from the funds he redirected from your business guarantee. He had it mapped out. Your $800,000 was his down payment fund. The room was quiet. I turned the drive over in my fingers once, then set it down and looked at her directly. Nikki, I need you to understand. This drive needs to go through my attorney before anything else. Douglas Farr. I want it handled properly, so it's admissible. I know, she said. I've already spoken to a family law attorney in Charlotte. She told me the same thing. She paused. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because my children need their father to be held accountable, and I can't do that alone. I called Douglas into the office. He reviewed the drive for 20 minutes while Nikki and I talked. When he came back in, his expression was the particular kind of control that lawyers were when they are genuinely impressed. This is comprehensive, he said, setting the drive on the desk. The budget projection alone establishes premeditated financial fraud. Combined with the forensic audit we already have, this closes the case on the asset diversion. After Nikki left, Douglas's paralegal already scheduling her into a formal deposition. I sat at my desk for a long moment. Then my phone buzzed. A text from a number I recognized now as Reed Calloway's. Ray, I know this looks bad. Can we talk? Man to man. I think there's a way through this that doesn't have to get ugly. I read it twice. Then I type back one line. My attorney's name is Douglas Farr. His number is in your phone. I set the phone face down on the desk. Reed Calloway wanted a conversation. What he was going to get was a deposition. The difference between those two things was the difference between a man who thought he could still negotiate and a man about to discover that the negotiating window had closed 8 months ago. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Connor was at his desk somewhere in Midtown, running numbers that had nothing to do with any of this. Roy was downstairs, steady as a wall. Douglas was already drafting. Victor Aldine was coming in tomorrow morning with documentation that his own daughter would not be able to counter. Everything was in motion. Everything was where it needed to be. The article ran on a Tuesday morning. I found it at 6 a.m. when Douglas sent me a link with a single word. Predictable. The headline read, Manhattan PR executive speaks out. My husband controlled everything. The piece ran 400 words in a lifestyle publication with a substantial online readership. Portia was photographed looking poised and slightly wounded, seated in what appeared to be a hotel suite. The article described a marriage characterized by emotional distance, financial domination, and a husband who responded to her attempt to find happiness by weaponizing their shared assets. There was no mention of Maui, no mention of Reed Calloway, no mention of the 8 months of documented deception preceding the text she sent at midnight. I read it once, set my phone down, made espresso. Then I called Douglas. How do you want to handle it? He asked. 2 things, I said. First, send the publication's editor the prenuptial agreement summary and the forensic audit overview. Not everything, just enough to make them understand the liability of the story they're currently hosting. I paused. Second, I want the audio file released. The one from a cloud account. Douglas was quiet for a moment. We had discussed the audio file before. It was a recording from Portia's own device, a conversation with Reed, captured 14 months ago through an app whose microphone permissions she had never reviewed. In it, her voice was clear and unhurried. I'm not ready to give up the money yet. Once the Sedona deal closes, then we move. That file goes public, and this story dies in 12 hours, Douglas said. That's the point, I replied. By noon, the publication had quietly removed the article from its website. By 2 p.m., Douglas had released a 1-paragraph statement. No quotes, no drama. Attaching the prenuptial infidelity clause and noting that full documentation of the relevant facts had been provided to counsel for both parties. The silence that followed was its own statement. That same afternoon, word moved through the pharmaceutical distribution network. The specific professional world Portia had inhabited for a decade, that Reed Calloway's IRS lien and civil judgments had been filed as part of the discovery record in the divorce proceedings. His name, his debt, his history, all of it now on public record. 2 industry contacts called me that afternoon to ask, carefully, whether certain pending agreements with Calloway's firm needed to be reviewed. I told them to speak with their own counsel. By Thursday, Reed Calloway's consulting contracts in the Mid-Atlantic market had gone quiet. 2 clients had put engagement renewals on hold, pending the outcome of the proceedings. A third had terminated outright. Portia called Connor that evening. He answered, which surprised me when he told me later. She had apparently wanted him to serve as an intermediary, to carry a message to me that she wanted to talk, privately, outside the attorney's. Connor's response, as he recounted it to me the next morning, was brief. "Mom, I found the laptop. I know when it started. There's nothing to talk about." He had ended the call before she could respond. I did not comment on that when he told me. I simply nodded. Victor Aldean came to my office that Thursday morning, carrying a leather briefcase I had seen him carry in photographs from his prosecutorial years. He sat across from me, set the briefcase on the table, and opened it with the deliberate precision of a man who had spent decades making every motion count in a courtroom. Inside were three things: a handwritten journal with dated entries going back 22 months, a printout of a conversation he had overheard between Portia and Reed at a family dinner 11 months ago, documented the same evening and signed by Victor as a witnessed account, and a letter Portia had written him 4 months ago asking him to explain how to move assets into a personal trust without triggering marital disclosure requirements. He had kept the letter. He had kept all of it. "I didn't know what I was watching at the time," he said quietly. "I thought she was stressed. I told myself it was a difficult period in the marriage." He looked at me steadily. I was wrong to tell myself that. I looked at the briefcase for a long moment. Then I looked at Victor Aldean, 68 years old, a man who had spent his career prosecuting people who thought they could build lies that held. "Thank you, Victor," I said. He closed the briefcase and pushed it across the table to me. "Win this, Raymond," he said. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. For all of it." I accepted that without comment. Sometimes the most dignified response to an apology is simply to receive it. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday in late April. Douglas had spent 2 weeks preparing the filing. Asset division, custody provisions for the child we were expecting through a surrogate arrangement Portia had agreed to 18 months earlier and apparently forgotten was legally binding. Full invocation of the prenuptial infidelity clause, and a separate civil action against Reed Calloway for fraudulent misrepresentation in a guaranteed business arrangement. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:30. Dark suit, no tie. Douglas met me in the lobby with his briefcase and the particular calm of a man who has done this enough times to know when a case is already decided. Portia arrived 9 minutes later with her attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Diane Holt who had a reputation for aggressive negotiation. Portia wore a charcoal blazer and kept her eyes forward as she crossed the lobby. She did not look at me. I noted that. Victor Aldean arrived 2 minutes after Portia. He walked past his daughter without stopping. She turned and said his name, once quietly. He did not slow his stride. He came to stand beside Douglas and me and set his briefcase on the bench beside us. "Ready," I said quietly. "Been ready for 30 years, he replied. The courtroom was small and deliberately unglamorous. Fluorescent light, pale wood paneling, the faint smell of old paper. Judge Patricia Renner presided. She had a reputation for reading case files thoroughly and tolerating no wasted time. Douglas had specifically requested her assignment. The proceedings opened with Diane Holt filing a motion to exclude the audio recording from Portia's cloud account, arguing it had been obtained without consent. Douglas countered with a device sharing agreement signed when we set up the household network 4 years earlier, a document that established shared account access across all linked devices. Judge Renner reviewed it for 90 seconds and denied the exclusion motion without comment. The audio file was admitted. Diane Holt's second motion was to challenge the prenuptial infidelity clause on the grounds of coercion. Douglas introduced Victor Aldean's sworn affidavit, written in the precise, formal language of a federal prosecutor, attesting that he had reviewed the prenuptial agreement independently before his daughter signed it, had advised her of its terms in full, and had witnessed her signature voluntarily given. He further attested that 11 months prior to the Maui ceremony, he had observed and documented a private conversation between Portia and Reed Calloway at a family dinner that indicated premeditation. Diane Holt objected. Judge Renner overruled. Victor was called to give testimony. He walked to the stand with the measured pace of a man who had spent decades in rooms exactly like this one. He answered every question in the same quiet, precise register. When Diane Holt pressed him on why he had chosen to testify against his own daughter, he looked at her with the kind of steadiness that does not come from rehearsal. "Because the truth does not change based on who it is inconvenient for," he said. "My daughter made choices. Those choices have consequences. I'm not going to stand in the way of those consequences." The courtroom was very quiet after that. By 11:45, Judge Renner had ruled. Full invocation of the prenuptial infidelity clause. Portia's claim to jointly held assets was nullified. The surrogacy arrangement remained legally binding under both parties' prior consent. The civil action against Reed Calloway was referred to the appropriate division with the court's notation that the evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation was substantial. Portia sat motionless while Diane Holt gathered papers. At one point she turned and looked at her father. He was already standing, closing his briefcase. He did not look back. Connor was waiting in the hallway outside when Douglas and I emerged. He shook Douglas's hand, then turned to me. He didn't say anything immediately. He put his hand on my shoulder for a moment, just that, and then dropped it. "Lunch," he said. "Yes," I said. "Somewhere quiet." We walked out of the courthouse into a gray April afternoon. Reed Calloway had not appeared. His attorney had filed a notice of separate representation that morning, which Douglas had anticipated. The civil case against him would proceed on its own timeline. The IRS lien, the civil judgments, Nikki's deposition, the flash drive. It was all filed, all documented, all moving forward through the machinery of consequence. He had borrowed my name, my money, and my trust. Now he had my attorney. 3 months later, I was sitting in the third base line seats at Yankee Stadium with Connor when my phone buzzed. I silenced it without looking at it and watched the pitcher wind up. We had come to 3 games together when Connor was growing up. Never enough. Always something that got in the way. Work, travel, the general machinery of building a company. I had told myself there would be time later. There is never as much later as you think. Connor had a hot dog in one hand and his program folded in the other, the same way he used to hold it at 12 years old. Some things do not change, and that particular continuity was worth more to me than I could have put into words. "She called again," he said, eyes on the field. Not accusing, just reporting. "I know," I said. "You don't have to answer." He was quiet for a moment. "I picked up this time. Last Thursday." A pause. "She cried. Said she made a catastrophic mistake. Said Reed had turned out to be exactly what you always told me to watch out for in business. A man who borrows credibility and delivers nothing." He exhaled. "She asked if there was any chance." I watched the pitch. "Strike 2. What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her I needed time," Connor said. "I told her I didn't know yet." He turned the program over in his hands. "Is that wrong?" "No," I said. "That's honest." He nodded. We watched the next pitch in silence. The surrogate's due date was 11 weeks out. Douglas had finalized the legal custody framework the previous week. Clean, complete, uncontested. Whatever else had happened, that future was secure. Reed Calloway's situation had continued its downward trajectory without any additional effort from my end. The civil judgment had moved forward. The IRS had formalized its lien into active collection proceedings. Nikki had filed for divorce in North Carolina, and the family court there had issued an emergency support order that attached to what remained of his liquid assets. 2 of his former Mid-Atlantic clients had joined the civil action as co-plaintiffs. The Sedona property had never closed. The mortgage lender had withdrawn the pre-approval when the IRS flag surfaced during title review. He had run a very elaborate operation and ended up with nothing, not even a house. Portia had relocated to an apartment in Brooklyn. Her PR firm had terminated her contract the week after the audio file became part of the public court record. She was, by all accounts, rebuilding from a much smaller foundation than she had expected to be standing on. That was not my concern. I had no interest in adding to her difficulties, and no interest in diminishing them either. She had made her choices. So had I. Victor Aldine called me on a Sunday morning 3 weeks after the hearing. He asked how I was. I told him honestly, I was well and getting better. He said the same. We talked for 11 minutes about nothing in particular. Baseball standings, a new restaurant near his apartment, a book he had been reading. It was the most ordinary conversation I had ever had with a man. Before he hung up, he said, "You did the right thing, Raymond. Every step." I thanked him and meant it. Roy retired at the end of that month. 40 years of standing between lobbies and the people who lived above them. His last day fell on a Friday. I went down to the lobby personally, shook his hand, and gave him an envelope. Inside was a letter and a check generous enough that he would not have to think about work again if he chose not to. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. "You were always one of the good ones, Mr. Colby," he said. "So were you, Roy." I told him. He nodded once, put on his hat, and walked out the front door of the building for the last time. I watched him go, then turned and took the elevator back upstairs. At the stadium, the seventh inning came and went. Connor bought 2 more sodas and handed me one without asking whether I wanted it, which is the particular kind of attention that does not announce itself. The game was close. The crowd was loud. The late afternoon light fell across the field in long, warm lines. I leaned back in my seat and let the noise fill in around me. The prenup had saved the assets. The documentation had won the case. But the thing that had actually gotten me through the last several months, the thing I kept coming back to when the nights were long and the apartment felt too quiet, was simpler than any of that. It was knowing exactly who I was when it mattered. No performance. No collapse. Just a man who built things carefully and did not walk away from what he had built.